Today, we will be looking at one of the most beautiful openings of all time, the Vienna Game, from the perspective of first world champion Wilhelm Steinitz against Louis Poulsen from Germany, played in 1870. This was not just a game between two of the best players of their time, this was a battle of ideologies. Two chess players who were fighting for different eras. Wilhelm Steinitz, a proponent of the old style chess, looking to keep his king in the center of the board and play aggressive gambits in order to win games. Louis Poulsen, who was more interested in development, controlling the center, and castling. He played very similar to how a chess master nowadays would play. Like I said, they played the Vienna, and this starts off with e4, e5, and then you'll see knight to c3, knight to c6, and usually the bishop comes to c4. Though at this point we are in the Vienna game. We're going to talk about the ideas, we're going to look at some of the sidelines, some of the positions that these two players found themselves in, and then we're going to see a slew of amazing, brilliant moves that transpire from this position. On top of that, we're going to see the clash of these two styles mixed together. Now, normally, bishop to c4 is the proper idea. This light square bishop is considered to be dangerous, but while knight to a5 is tempting, saying, okay, bishop to b3, I'm going to take that bishop, and now you don't have your light squared piece anymore, you're a little premature. Bishop f7, the king takes back, and then queen h5. The best move is g6, queen a5, forking the rook and the knight. And yes, you're just completely winning. You've won 2 pawns, the king's stuck in the center of the board, and we're going to win this knight back because, I don't know, bishop g7. Queen takes, done. So you have to be careful, and this does highlight just how potent the Vienna game can be. So you'll probably see something like knight f6 instead. You'll most likely want to try to defend this pawn. If you were to play knight to f3, now our opponent has a tactic. Knight takes e4, knight takes back, and here d5, forking the two pieces. And now black actually has a bit of an advantage. So you would normally see not knight to f3, but d3. Knight to f3 is coming. And then a slew of options like bishop to b4, knight to a5, or simply just something more conservative like bishop e7. But normally this bishop will come out. Even bishop to c5, attacking f2, with the idea of this knight coming out to g4 at some point. Maybe after then d6. Either way, this whole slew of lines doesn't even occur because Wilhelm Steinitz plays a legendary gambit. f4, the Steinitz gambit, in fact, named after the world champion himself. Now, this position may look familiar, but it's a little different. Normally, after knight to f6, you would see the Falkbeer counter gambit, where after the pawn takes, we push the pawn to e5, and there's nowhere better for this knight to go other than g8. And I actually had quite a lot of trouble playing in this position. It's really impossible to play. Just look, like it's white's move. We can play bishop c4 now, and white, look at black. Just no pieces have moved. This pawn's in the middle of nowhere. It's very difficult to defend, and white is already in an advantageous position. But the reason why this works is because knight to f6 played. What makes this unique is that Steinitz isn't interested in pushing the pawn. He's just sacrificing the pawn and not playing knight to f3, which, by the way, prevents a queen h4 attack, but d4, controlling the center. And what you're going to see is a unique line that really only Wilhelm Steinitz can pull off. Queen h4. You can't play g3 because after pawn takes back, if you were to take back, the rook's hanging. You can even just, I mean, this is best, but you can even take this pawn and you're also winning. Either way, you just can't defend that way. But Wilhelm Steinitz plays king to e2. And after d6, bishop g4, and long castles, the engine actually slightly prefers black here. And this position really identifies the two ideologies of these players. Wilhelm Steinitz quoted as saying, if necessary precautions are taken, the king can defend itself. He's interested in keeping the king in the center of the board and creating a structure that his opponent cannot break. While this will cause some inconveniences early in development, later on he's going to have an advantage. That is his philosophy. To articulate Louis Poulsen's point, there's an interesting quote by Paul Morphy in 1883 when Wilhelm Steinitz actually went to New Orleans. And they said, Paul Morphy, do you know that Wilhelm Steinitz is actually in New Orleans right now? And Paul Morphy said, I know. his gambit is bad. And honestly, it's not that great, but it's very difficult to stop. And yes, you do see the correct idea here. D6, knight f3, attacking the queen. You don't have to retreat the queen, though. Bishop g4, pinning the knight to the king. We see bishop takes f4, and after castles, the rook's going to eventually go to e8, and this is going to be very dangerous. Now, we're going to play king to e3. And just so you know, one idea that could be played here is just bishop takes. And you actually have to play king f3 here to defend the bishop. This is how insane Wilhelm Steinitz is. But after something like queen h5, king f2, queen takes, rook takes, you can see that in this case, Wilhelm Steinitz's battle for his particular style of chess is correct. The king's in the center of the board, sure. But now queens are off the board. Now we have the control of the center. And this is actually advantageous for white if you can get the queens off the board. Saying, I'm not afraid of a little inconvenience early because later on I will prevail. Either way, long castles, king e3, and then queen h5, trying to add some pressure to the knight. But bishop e2. And actually, believe it or not, at this point in the game on move 9, despite playing one of the most dubious openings that you could possibly imagine in the Vienna game, Wilhelm Steinitz is sort of winning here. I mean, so queen to a5 is played, which is a strange move. But the whole point here is that if you, let's say, play knight f6, a very common development move in the Vienna, you'd have to watch out for h3. And basically, bishop takes back, attacking the queen, and now we're eyeing down b7 and the knight on c6, which scared Louis Paulsen quite a lot. So that wasn't really the best option. If the bishop moves back, careful not to go to e6 because of this fork here, and you've lost the bishop. So you would actually have to move all the way back to d6, and then knight to g5. And we're not only attacking the queen, but we're preparing our bishops to attack the king side. And all these lines are scary, right? Like this isn't necessarily what Louis Paulsen had in mind. But after queen to a5, we see a3, and all of a sudden b4, also looking like a very scary idea. Of course, now the queen side isn't necessarily any better than the king side. And listen, not only are we basically bouncing the queen around like a basketball, but we're approaching the king side. So this is why moving the queen around so early in the opening isn't always the best idea. And Wilhelm Steinitz is basically taking advantage of this to the fullest capacity. Bishop takes and king takes back. You would think this is the perfect opportunity to play bishop f3, but here comes g5, defended by the queen. And the whole point here is you would like to play b4. But if you did play b4 here, pawn takes, checking the king. And this extra check ends up being very bad for us. So instead of taking with the bishop, you take with the king. Because now if you play g7, you can now play b4. And basically, you're going to end up winning a minor piece, or you're going to win this this pawn here and attack the rook. Or even after queen to b6, another interesting line is bishop to e3. And you could actually trap the queen in this way. Either way, this is two men who are playing chess, not checkers. So king takes f3. And now the queen comes to h5, but simply just king e3. And we're attacking the queen. There's no more light squared bishop defending for black. And it's looking pretty bad for our opponents. So queen to h4. And we're seeing tons of queen moves here. The pawn goes to b4. And the ideas are forming. And I believe Wilhelm Steinitz is just straight up winning here. I mean, his king's in a really awkward position. But this pawn push is very scary. These rooks are going to eventually get to A, B, C, somewhere along these lines. You're going to break through these pawns. And once these bishop pair comes into play, maybe you get in like bishop G4, there's going to be a lot of pressure on the king. So G5. Of course, this allows bishop to G3, attacking the queen, and literally forcing the queen to H6. You have to go to H6 here. There's nowhere else safe to go. And that allows B5. So we're just moving his pieces now. We're infiltrating the king side, and we're pushing his queen around. So the knight moves over to E7, and we play rook to F1. We're attacking the weaknesses in his position. So knight's f6. Of course, the queen's defending the knight, and we know the knight wants to go to f6. It's desperate to go to f6. But king to f2. And yes, Wilhelm Steinitz is manually castling. He's going to go to g1. I'm sorry, it's just funny. Like it's now so okay. Knight to g6, king to g1. It's now move 18, and Wilhelm Steinitz has played 6 king moves. It's unheard of, guys. It's unheard of, and you would only see this in this old school style of chess that he was working so hard to defend. But honestly, he's doing a great job as an advocate for this idea because look at this position. These pieces are not really developed very well. I mean, the rooks aren't even connected really. And we have the bishop pair, and the king's safe. This king in g1. I'm gonna give you a little crystal ball prediction into the future. This king will never move again. His king is gonna move a lot. And it starts off where queen to g7 because don't forget, guys, after the king manually castles, there's an attack on this knight. So the queen defends, and then queen d2. Small improving move, but we're attacking g5, and you don't want to just lose the pawn. So h6 and a4. So the small improving move that attacks the piece. And listen, Wilhelm Steinitz isn't like, I'm going to trick a top 5 chess player in the world into giving me his g5 pawn. He's saying once he defends his g5 pawn, this is what I'm going to do. So it's basically just playing a couple moves ahead. The rook comes to g8, which honestly is a desperate attempt to maybe get a push on the g4, h5, h6, and open up the position for the king. But white is just much quicker. And he proves this with b6, by the way. b6 completely opens up the b file. You're going to take. And now something like a5 is wide open, and that's just not ideal. But I want you to notice a couple of things here. So for starters, Wilhelm Steinitz has an idea. Sure, you can play a5, but rook takes knight on f6 instead. And listen, guys, a5 is fine, completely winning, but this is brilliant. And Wilhelm Steinitz is a brilliant man who sacrifices his rook, because the knight was defending g4 as well as d5. And here, after the queen takes back, while the queen is the most powerful piece on the board, it is not a knight. It does not have the octopus-like L-shaped equity on the board. I don't even know. I don't know what I'm looking at here, but okay. The bishop comes to g4 with check. You can't block this properly without giving back the exchange. And after the king moves over, this bishop will be very useful, I promise. Just wait. This bishop is in a really good spot, and it's not going anywhere. Knight to d5. Because now, also, the knight is not defending this square either. And this is really nice. We're also attacking the queen, so the queen has to back up. And here, a5 is played now. So basically saying, I'm going to play a5, but I want to get my pieces a little bit more involved in the action first. And if you were to take, just to show you how bad this is, knight to c7, king takes. It's 6 points of material here, but it's calculated that this is actually checkmate in 6 or 8. It's some even number where Wilhelm Steinitz embarrasses this poor German man. This grandmaster legend gets embarrassed because he's down 6 points of material, but he's just gonna win. Yeah, I mean, you can't do it. Like you can't take that pawn. It's an awful pawn. You can't take it. So instead, pushing f5, because we can block the bishop out of the show. But guys, yes, Wilhelm Steinitz is hanging the bishop, but he doesn't care. Pawn takes b6, because if you take the bishop, we have rook sack a5, forcing the king to take. Queen a5, the king has to move over, no choice, and then just c7, just b takes c. And yeah, we're forking the king and the rook. And you have to, guys, you have to take with the queen and lose the queen. Because if you don't, we can actually promote to a rook and ruthlessly end our opponent's existence. So yeah, that line just means you can't take the bishop. And actually, to Lewis Paulson's credit, he realizes like, oh yeah, I can't take this bishop because rook a5 is really mean, and that's gonna hurt my tummy. So just just, c takes b. But guys, Wilhelm Steinitz says, no, not one brilliant move. I want two brilliant moves. Knight b6. Knight b6. Listen, if you take, I hate to break it to you, if you take this bishop here, rook a8, the king moves over, and here comes queen c3. Check. Yeah, you have to take the knight. And then here comes queen a5. You scoot over because you have no other choice. Bam, d6. King moves over, and yeah, there you go. That's just checkmate. It's a big checkmate sandwich. You just can't do it. You can't take. This bishop is immortal. You can't take the bishop. So instead, just knight to e7. Because listen, this guy's good. Like, he knows what's gonna happen here. He knows that if rook to a5 is played, he's gonna need to defend the knight on c6. So for example, bang, bang, and not taking the knight because we know that's not a good idea. But actually, after queen to c3, knight to c6, and yeah, we can defend ourselves. So that's why he would play knight to e7. And Steinitz is patient. He says, fine, I'm going to take. Not even the best move, but it's quite good. Lewis Paulsen decides to go to f7, and he's actually doing a deep calculation here that's quite interesting. And Wilhelm Steinitz says, I don't care about your calculation. I'm going to try to reroute your queen. So, listen, the queen is defending d5, which doesn't look important because the knight's also defending d5. But check this line out. Let's say pawn to f6, and Lewis Paulsen takes this pawn, not being able to defend d5 anymore. Check this out. Rook a5, king c7, right? Don't forget this bishop has quite a lot of control over the light squares. Queen c3. The knight goes in front because we know taking the knight here is losing. And then, guys, knight d5, forking the queen and the king. But you don't care about his queen. You don't care about that queen because this is actually checkmate. This is actually an absolutely diabolical checkmate. So you can't let him divert your queen. You have to actually ignore this threat and play knight to c6. And you know what? This man's defending great. Steinitz decides to push c4. This push is going nowhere. These pawns are going nowhere. And after knight to a7, queen to a2, the knight goes to b5 because you have to defend mate on a7. We have knight to d5. He doesn't even want to take this knight here. He wants to block the queen out, and he wants to defend c7 and prepare queen a5 checkmate. The queen sacrifices, pawn takes, and here knight takes on d4. Queen checks a7, king moves over, rook check. In this situation, the bishop, which exerts complete control over the light square diagonal, the queen, which is blocking off b8 and b6, the king's escape squares, we have rook c6, absolutely brilliant, amazing sacrifice, but it's not a sacrifice because this pawn is pinned and it's game over. When looking back at this game, there's a really interesting quote that I want to leave you off with, which basically said, I later realized that many of my sacrifices were incorrect. It is better to focus on my defense and weakening my opponent's position instead of going for these sacrifices. And what he's saying is, listen, guys, these are objectively brilliant sacrifices, but not all of his sacrifices were brilliant, and many of the times, in order to get to the next level, he needed to play a more structural, defensive approach. He needs to create weaknesses and then hit his brilliant tactics later. If you apply the same exact principle, it doesn't matter what opening you play, you're going to do amazing. I'm going to leave some more openings down below that I think you'd also really like to check out. But either way, stay classy, my friends. Until next time.